Hey YouTube, this is Bill, just doing an update on my solar and wind project. As you can see on top of my shed, I currently have 9 of the Harbor Freight panels put up there, all put up in parallel, all going into this junction box, and then all going down into my charge controllers and batteries. Also, there's a little shot of my wind turbine. Not a lot of wind today, just barely spinning, but it don't take much to get those this WindBlue turbine with those 5 blades going, so it'll spin up pretty easy, just a little breeze. Go in and take a little look in the shed, what changes I've done here. Got a few things going on a little different than what I had before. As I was saying earlier, I bring my solar down in for that combiner box, and I go into this, basically it's a 3-way switch, and I can choose between grid tie or battery. I'm currently grid tied, and it's going over into this grid tie inverter. But I also can switch it back to battery when I want it. So you can see here I have the ProStar 30 as my charge controller. Great little charge controller, pretty simple, and for the price it does a great job. It's not an MPPT, but I'm not, since I don't have a big array and stuff, I don't know that I really need a MPPT controller and the batteries and such for what I'm doing. But it works great. I'd recommend it to anybody. Again, it's not, it's not one of the best ones on the market, but for what it's doing, I'd recommend it. It does a great job. So then we can go to battery, and there's, you can see my, there's my amps, solar amps coming in right now. About 5.8. I think it's going to be about 6 amps. You can see my voltage is already climbing. 5.9. And yeah, so the Harbor Freight panels, considering how I have them wired up, I don't have them at the best angle possible for the sun in this area, and the wiring and everything, so I don't expect to get the full 9, which would be the claim for the 3 sets of panels. They're all 3 point something amps, but I am seeing around 6 to 7 amps on some of my best solar days, and that's still pretty good considering, because like I said, those panels aren't, I've read a lot of reviews, and most people don't see the true 9 amps out of them always. So, but I'm pretty tickled to have them. I got them pretty cheap. Didn't have to pay shipping. They had a sale on $149, and I had 20% coupon, so it kind of worked out for, like I said, for my little budget and what I'm trying to do. And over here I have my charge controller for my wind turbine, and basically this is a charge controller from Windy Nation, and it does a fairly decent job. A little bit complex to get set up and such, but it works pretty good. I did have it all in a closed box, but I decided to pull it out and mount it basically after I saw a picture on their website of how they're selling their new complete systems, so I went ahead and did something very similar. It makes it kind of neat. They have the Coleman Air volt and amp meter connected into my wind turbine, so I could see what was going on. In previous videos I had the analog gauges, but I never could really get detailed information. You can see the wind's blowing a little bit, and I keep getting a few little microamps there, 0.1, 0.3 coming in. So the same thing with my wind turbine that I did with my solar. I can choose between grid tie or dump load, and basically, this type of charge controller is a diversion load type controller, so that when the battery voltage reaches a certain point, and then it kicks over my load to another source. And I chose to use a 3-way switch here that I could choose between this dump load and or go to my grid tie, and that works out really well. And then here I have basically a 3-way switch that allows me to short out my turbine in the event that I need to furl it or stop it in the high winds, so I can flip it up for on and down for turbine lock, which basically just shorts it, and it does a great job. It shuts it right down. And both those all come down into this this box here, this breaker box, which then feeds into my battery. I have two 30 amp breakers here, and each one's separated from wind and solar, so I can work on each other one independently. Works out great. Then I go into here where I have my, this is the shunt for the Trimetric 2020, and then I also have the shunt here for this Coleman Air amp and volt. And as you can see, in the time that I've been in here with the solar and everything, I just went up to dump load. Whenever that red light's on, it means it's dumping. Green light means it's on battery. Since I'm dumping, that means now I'm either going to be going through either the dump load or the grid tie inverter, basically. For the most part, I plan to always leave it on grid tie so I can get every little amp coming through, at least do something with it. But in the event that this was down or I need to work on it, I can also jump it into this dump load. And then lastly, I have everything wired in. Currently, I'm still using this Black & Decker. It's a 750 watt modified sine wave inverter, and I don't have it actually wired in right now. I'm just finishing that up. But what I'm doing is I'm connecting that in. Over here, I have, you can see this mess of outlets and switches. And what I did was I took this three-way switch here, and based on some reviews and things I've seen on videos, I basically took my 20 amp service coming from my house that I use to grid tie back into, and I allow it to flip between the shed to go between grid or alternative energy such as the inverter. And what happens is this outlet box will become grid enabled, and or it will become enabled off this inverter once I finish up a few things. So getting close, but in concept it works real well, and I've tested it and it does work. It's just a matter of getting everything fine-tuned and everything in the back. I got some wiring issues that I got to take care of in the back. So there's my system. And one last thing I guess about the grid tie inverter. Again, I have an on and off switch for it. It's basically a 30 amp switch that I can take the whole thing down, so if I need to take the grid tie off completely, I can. And then a little quick view here. I hear my wind turbine barely spinning, but there it goes climbing up. 1.8 amps, 2 amps. See the voltage jumping there. Again, not a very windy day, so it doesn't take much to start getting amps out of this thing. Pretty pleased with it. See if it'll climb up a little bit more. Short of a really good windy day, I usually average around between 2 to 5 amps. You know, that's kind of an average, you know, for me. And then on some nice breezy days and such, then I'll jump up between 10 and I think the highest that I've ever seen is around 14 amps, and I think that's pretty close to its max rating for that model turbine and such. But it does a good job. Pretty pleased with it. Alright guys, well, I don't want to bore you. Most of these things you've probably seen before. It's just what I've got going on and how I've decided to enable it. I'm always looking for advice and comments on how I could do it better. Taking a little view of my turbine here, spinning. One thing I did do is I changed the way that I had it wired in. I did have it in the 3-phase connection, and I decided to test out with the direct DC connections. And you know, I just haven't really noticed a difference. I can't say that I get any more amps in either way, but mostly because of the fact that my distance of my wire runs pretty short, and I imagine it really doesn't matter that I'm going straight DC down. For those of you that have to go, you know, really long distances, you probably have a difference between the 3-phase and the direct DC. So I don't know if I'll ever go back and forth, but they both pretty much work the same. And then one more little view of my solar panels. Using some various techniques I've seen on the internet, I was able to get them mounted very quickly. I just basically used some super strut that I got from Home Depot, and the cables fairly cheap. I think the whole system cost me about $25 total to mount it, and then of course I got like $6 in a junction box, so fairly cheap. The most expensive thing is just the panels, and again I went pretty cheap with the Harbor Freight ones for now, but in the future, you know, I may go up to, you know, a little bit nicer panels and try to get into something that has, you know, a couple hundred watts panels. But I'm finding that the shipping is just way too much for me to have these high level panels unless I get like a pallet worth, and I'm just not ready for that yet. So alright guys, well, I'd love to hear from you. Any questions or comments, let me know, and please rate my video. Thanks.